Meghan has got no real income anymore. She's finished.
Right.
The Netflix series is over. There's no great podcast. They don't generate any money. And I don't see where she is going from here. I think she has a major problem.
Your sister, your half-sister, has just lost her $100 million Netflix contract. What do you think?
Meghan, off.
What's the title of her show? Love Meghan. For what? To watch? Who wants to watch Meghan Markle bake a pie?
I'm gonna miss their latent fear in interacting with her, that they say something wrong, like call her Meghan Markle instead of it's Sussex now, and just her latent anger underneath every interaction.
My name is Megan Sussex now. Call me Meghan Markle one more time, Mindy f***ing Kaling.
Before anyone said the word canceled, something far more dangerous happened. Nothing, no outrage, no backlash, no viral defenses. When Meghan's Netflix project quietly slipped from conversation, industry watchers noticed something unsettling. Not falling numbers, not bad press, but a sudden absence of urgency.
I don't think anybody at Netflix could have seen the show before it went out, because it's not entertainment, it's not edifying in any way. It's really, really bizarre.
As if the platform itself no longer knew how to explain why the show existed beyond the contract that made it unavoidable. That's where this story actually begins. Not with critics tearing it apart, not with trolls celebrating, but with Netflix emotionally clocking out.
Everything she touches turns to shit. And I think every sort of creative person behind her or deep pocket behind her knows it's an extraordinary risk. She's too toxic to touch.
At the same time, royal biographer Tom Bower stepped back into the frame. And instead of accusing Meghan of lying or exaggerating, he made a far more uncomfortable claim, one that reframed everything people thought they were reacting to. According to Bower, the issue wasn't truth, it was timing, emotional timing, frequency, fatigue. And while that quiet disengagement was unfolding behind closed doors, Prince Harry was unraveling somewhere no one expected, a courtroom.
And to hear them claim in their defense that I don't have any right to privacy is disgusting. They have made my wife's life an absolute misery, my lord.
Not arguing facts, not arguing law, but reliving history in real time, as if years of unresolved grievance had finally found a microphone that couldn't cut away. That's when the narrative fractured, because this was never just about a show, or a lawsuit, or even public sympathy. It was about what happens when vulnerability feels curated, when relevance fades administratively, and when a story loses control of its own framing.
Why? Why are you doing this? Why are you demeaning yourself in this fashion? Because Meghan has hired a house which is supposedly worth between £5 million and £10 million. And she's got her famous friends, except of course none of us will have heard of her famous friends, so they're not that famous friends. And she's giving all these really bizarre and quite cryptic guides on how to be the perfect hostess.
The first warning sign wasn't a headline, it was what didn't happen after release. No second wave promotion, no executive quotes defending the vision, no sudden push across the homepage. Inside streaming platforms, failure rarely announces itself loudly, it drifts. Projects that spark belief get protected. They're reframed, re-edited, reintroduced. This one wasn't. The energy around it cooled almost immediately, as if enthusiasm had been spent before the audience ever arrived.
Well, I think it was inevitable, and I've seen this coming for a long time based on the very few times that I actually watched 5 minutes of 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 episodes, and it just struck me as completely empty, completely fake, and I knew it was only a matter of time before this would happen.
What unsettled industry insiders wasn't whether people liked the show, it was how quickly internal conversations shifted away from it. Meetings moved on, talking points disappeared. The project became something no one volunteered to explain. That's not cancellation, that's disengagement. And disengagement happens when a platform realizes it can't answer a simple question anymore. Who is this for right now? The show didn't offend, it didn't shock, it didn't collapse under backlash. Instead, it landed at an emotional temperature that didn't match the moment it entered.
Just because you marry a prince doesn't mean you can become a lifestyle guru. She really thought in a way she could just sort of, rock up and become the new Martha Stewart. And the problem is she's inauthentic, and people have to like you to want to go into your TV kitchen or your mate's kitchen or whatever it is.
Viewers weren't angry enough to argue. They weren't moved enough to defend it. So they did the one thing algorithms can't fight. They scrolled. For a company built on retention, that reaction is fatal, because indifference offers no data to optimize against, no controversy to ride, no momentum to redirect, just a flat line. And when that happens, platforms don't pull plugs dramatically. They pause, they delay, they stop asking what's next, which is exactly when the real problem begins. Because once a system stops needing you to explain your work, it has already moved on.
People aren't watching it. I mean, it's an effort to watch a single episode because each episode is 40 minutes long. And you've got to have a lot more interest in Meghan Sussex.
This is where Tom Bower changed changes the temperature of the conversation. He doesn't question facts, he doesn't accuse deception, he doesn't even challenge intent. Instead, he suggests something far more destabilizing. The message arrived out of sync. Bauer's argument isn't that the emotions were manufactured, it's that they were delivered with the precision of a performance, not the unpredictability of lived experience. Viewers didn't ask whether the feelings were real, they asked why they were being presented this way.
What mother or father in the name of sweet Jesus has enough time to create a fruit plate at 6 o'clock on a Monday morning when there's toast throwing around the room? And her kitchen was just sterile and awful, and I hate her. I'm so sorry, I really do.
It's the biggest piece of dog shit.
At this exact moment, with this level of polish, and that subtle shift matters, because authenticity isn't measured by honesty alone. It's measured by friction, by hesitation, by moments that feel unscripted and unresolved. When vulnerability arrives too cleanly, too evenly paced, audiences instinctively pull back, not in anger, in doubt. The stories didn't breathe. They arrived fully framed, emotionally resolved, and carefully contextualized. Nothing was left unfinished for the audience to sit with, and when everything is explained, nothing lingers.
What Meghan never really understood, probably not even now, is that when she was cheered as a working royal, it wasn't because she was Meghan Markle, it was because she represented British royalty and all the values of the Queen and all the tradition and 1,000 years of history.
Bauer's framing quietly reframed the entire reaction. What people felt wasn't betrayal, it was exhaustion, a sense that they were being asked to emotionally participate in something that had already been processed, edited, and positioned for them. That's when sincerity begins to feel instructional, and once vulnerability starts sounding like a thesis instead of a confession, the connection weakens fast, not because the story is untrue, but because it no longer feels discovered. And that emotional distance would soon expose a much deeper contradiction, one the cameras never addressed. And what Tom Bauer said really hit me. Look, I'm not saying their emotions were fake, but the presentation that became the problem. It's like seeing perfectly curated sadness on Instagram. It's real, but it's also controlled, and audiences can feel that difference. We've all been there, right? When something feels too polished to be spontaneous, the turning point wasn't a scene that aired, it was a reality that didn't.
The other Meghan, Meghan Markle, with Love Meghan, her show, your show's doing great. Her show was canceled. She said it was just a lot of work to do. What will you miss? What will you miss most about the show? Because I know you watched religiously.
I think it's going to be the terrified friends who, come in and they have to pretend that they all know each other really well and that she knows them really well. Like Daniel, the makeup artist, who clearly she doesn't know it all. He knows all her BS, but she doesn't know anything about him. He's been on a couple episodes, and then finally she'll be like, "Oh, do you have a boyfriend? Or do you have kids?" It's like these are things you would know if this were actually your friend.
While the show emphasized warmth, reflection, and emotional clarity, viewers began noticing a quiet disconnect between what was being expressed on screen and what remained untouched off it. Not as accusation, as absence, a space left unacknowledged that grew louder with every carefully framed moment. No interruption of production, no visible reconciliation, no pause to address the fracture everyone already knew existed. That omission mattered more than any line of dialogue. For many watching, it subtly reshaped the tone of everything that came before. The storytelling began to feel segmented, emotion placed into safe compartments, vulnerability curated where it could be controlled.
Here comes the first time in her life that Meghan Markle actually touches food. Let's watch that back. Why is she pushing apples into the salad? Oh dear, even her hands can't do acting.
While more uncomfortable realities stayed sealed off camera, this wasn't read as cruelty, it was read as emotional management. And that distinction changed the lens entirely. Audiences don't expect full transparency. They understand boundaries. But when a narrative promises intimacy while avoiding its most destabilizing tension, trust erodes quietly. The contrast becomes impossible to ignore, not because viewers demand explanations, but because the silence reframes intent. What once felt reflective started to feel selective, not manipulative, strategic. And public perception doesn't wait for nuance. It doesn't pause for context or private complexity. It reacts to contrast, to what's offered versus what's withheld.
They're living this extravagant lifestyle, pretending that they're just completely irrelevant when it comes to money and spending, like they just have endless amounts, but it's pretty obvious. I mean, staff quitting, staff getting fired continuously.
By the time critics articulated it, most viewers had already felt it. Something wasn't missing from the story. Something had been deliberately stepped around. And that realization didn't spark outrage. It sparked reinterpretation. interpretation. Suddenly, the entire project carried a cooler undertone, less confession, more containment. And as that understanding settled in, another emotional unraveling was already unfolding, far from the cameras and far less controlled. When Prince Harry entered the courtroom, the shift was immediate. This didn't feel procedural. It felt personal. Observers expected technical arguments, timelines, evidence. Instead, they watched something closer to emotional excavation. His responses carried weight that didn't belong to a single case. They sounded layered, accumulated, as if years of unresolved memory had been compressed into one setting that finally couldn't deflect. He wasn't just reacting to questions, he was reliving them. Each answer felt less like strategy and more like release. Not explosive, not uncontrolled, but heavy. The kind of weight that suggests something has been carried far too long without relief.
And rather than actually specifically answer them, he kept saying, you know, it's disgusting what they did to us. It's disgraceful. It's disgraceful. And in the end, the judge said, look, you know, it's not your job to emote. You know, it's not your job to tell us here on the stand. It's not your job to tell us whether you think this behavior is disgusting or not. It is your job to specifically answer the questions you are asked.
The courtroom became a place where restraint cracked, not dramatically, but visibly. And that visibility mattered, because for the first time in a long while, the emotion wasn't packaged. It wasn't guided by a narrative arc or softened by production. There were no cutaways, no music cues, no framing language, just raw delivery, landing unevenly in a space built for precision, not feeling. Coverage began to shift as a result. Commentary stopped focusing on the legal outcome and started circling something else entirely. The sense that this wasn't about a headline or a victory. It was about unresolved history demanding acknowledgement in the only environment left that couldn't mute it. That made the moment unsettling. Not because it was inappropriate, but because it felt overdue. And in contrast to the measured storytelling elsewhere, this scene felt unfiltered in a way audiences hadn't seen before, which raised a quiet, uncomfortable question. If this is what uncontained emotion looks like, what had everything else been? And that question would follow the story into its next phase, where perception began to harden.
Everything about her is fraudulent, right? These are not real friendships. We all know that. These are not her recipes. Pouring pretzels from the store-bought bag into a cellophane bag is not a real piece of advice for people on how to make things feel more homegrown.
By this point, the issue wasn't exposure. It was pattern. Across memoirs, interviews, and long-form projects, a rhythm had formed that audiences could sense even if they couldn't articulate it. Deeply personal moments released at precise intervals, emotional disclosures framed carefully, then followed by silence until the next reveal. Nothing was accidental, and that precision became the problem. People don't reject vulnerability because it's too much. They pull away when it starts to feel scheduled. When emotion arrives with polish instead of hesitation, when every confession feels pre-approved, contextualized, and ready for consumption, the public didn't feel overwhelmed. They felt managed. That shift is subtle but decisive, because once audiences sense they're being guided toward a specific emotional response, empathy shuts down quietly, not in protest, in self-preservation. The story still carried weight, but they no longer surprised. Each new release felt less like discovery and more like continuation, another chapter placed exactly where it was expected to land. And expectation is dangerous. When vulnerability becomes predictable, it loses friction. Without friction, there's no tension. Without tension, there's nothing for the audience to hold on to emotionally. This is where the narrative began to slide from resistance into maintenance, from defiance into upkeep.
And then even season 2 of her show was fake. It was not a season 2, it was a lie. She did an original, 12 episodes I think it was, and they just cut them in half. They aired the first 6, and then as soon as it was done, she said, I've been renewed for a second season. It's like, no, they bought 12 episodes and you sliced it. Everybody knows that.
What once felt like breaking free started to resemble sustaining a position, not dishonest, just engineered. And engineering drains intimacy fast. By the time this realization settled in, engagement didn't disappear dramatically. It thinned. Viewership softened. Interest cooled without ceremony. Because when emotion starts to feel like part of a rollout, the audience doesn't argue. They disengage. And that disengagement would soon become institutional. Decline doesn't announce itself with rejection. It arrives as administration. No definitive no. No explosive fallout. Just a slow rearranging of priorities. Projects stop being fast-tracked. Responses take longer. Conversations lose momentum. Not because anyone is angry, but because attention has shifted elsewhere. In systems built on relevance, Speed is belief, and belief had clearly moved on. This is the phase most people miss. From the outside, everything still looks intact. Contracts exist, relationships remain polite, but inside the machine, urgency has vanished. The work is no longer defended. It's no longer framed as essential. It simply becomes optional, and optional is fatal.
The authenticity is really what the issue is, and there's, just hired a whole new PR firm and the whole thing. I think if you just tell people as it is, your bumps, your bruises, they forgive and accept. Like, for example, Charlie Sheen. Why can that guy step in shit all over the place, over and over again, and still be liked by people? Because he's the first guy to be like, yeah, it was me, and he just owns it all. And in Meghan's case, it seems to me she's absolutely determined to force feed the narrative, and damn it, they're going to accept it and keep going, and people are just too smart.
She thinks she's fooling us, and she never is.
What makes this stage chilling is its invisibility. There's no headline for delayed replies, no article about postponed decisions, no announcement when enthusiasm evaporates. It all happens quietly, behind scheduling conflicts and vague assurances. We'll revisit. Let's circle back. Timing's complicated. Those phrases don't sound like endings, but they are. This is what Tom Bauer was pointing toward without dramatizing. Not collapse, not exile, but detachment. A system no longer organizing itself around your presence. By the time that realization hits, the shift is already complete, because institutions don't sever ties impulsively. They loosen them until they fall away on their own. And the most damaging part? There's nothing to fight, no villain, no decision to appeal, no moment to rally public sympathy, just the awareness that doors aren't closing. They're no longer being open. And that's when relevance stops being debated and starts being managed elsewhere. This is why the story refuses to disappear. Not because people are furious, not because sides are being taken, but because something familiar is happening in real time. Audiences aren't watching out of loyalty or hostility anymore. They're watching to understand what happens when a narrative stops setting the terms of its own reception. When the audience no longer waits to be guided, persuaded, or emotionally instructed. What's driving attention now isn't outrage. It's recognition. Viewers see a broader pattern they've felt elsewhere. The exhaustion of being told how to interpret emotion, the quiet resistance to narratives that arrive pre-framed, pre-processed, and emotionally concluded. This story taps into that fatigue perfectly. Not as spectacle, but as case study. Every new development isn't consumed for drama. It's examined for signal. What does this reveal about attention, about credibility, about how quickly influence can thin once it stops feeling organic? That's why engagement persists even as passion fades. Because people aren't invested in the outcome. They're invested in the process.
And you can tell just the way she's artificially building herself up with like the humble brags that she constantly does. She's so incredibly needy. Like, I can't even be around it as a consumer. I can't imagine how Harry handles this as a full-time partner.
In watching how relevance dissolves without conflict and how control slips without confrontation, it's a uniquely modern unraveling. No villain arc, no redemption arc, just drift. And drift is unsettling because it offers no resolution. No final moment where the story ends cleanly. It simply continues, lighter each time, carrying less weight with every appearance. That's what keeps viewers clicking. Not anticipation of chaos, but curiosity about erosion, about what remains when emotional authority fades and the audience quietly steps back. And in that space, something irreversible happens. The story doesn't end, it stops leading. And once that happens, the next chapter belongs to the observers, not the subjects. So what's the real lesson here? In my view, it's this. Authenticity can't be forced. No matter how vulnerable you appear, if the audience senses it's calculated, that connection will never form. And this isn't just Meghan and Harry's story. This is the story of every creator, influencer, celebrity who turns vulnerability into content. We're living in an age where we've commodified pain, and audiences are getting better at spotting the difference between sharing and selling. By the time everything settles, there won't be a dramatic collapse to point to. No final statement, no explosive ending, just a quiet shift in attention that already feels complete. What this story reveals isn't failure in the traditional sense. It's something far more modern. Influence doesn't disappear when people turn against you. It fades when they stop needing you to explain yourself. When the audience no longer waits for context, meaning, or emotional guidance. That's the real turning point, because once a narrative loses its ability to shape how it's received, it becomes reactive. Each appearance carries less gravity. Each response lands soft, and eventually even major moments struggle to command focus. And if you want to see where that loss of control became impossible to ignore, the answer isn't on a streaming platform. It happened inside a courtroom, a moment where emotions spilled without filters, where frustration over years of perceived injustice surfaced all at once, where even the judge stepped in, issuing a rare warning as tensions escalated and a legal team abruptly walked away, leaving the atmosphere visibly shaken. That breakdown tells you everything about how much pressure had already built. So if you want the full context of how that moment unfolded and why it may have changed everything, watch the video linked next. This is Star Spotlight, where influence is tested, narratives unravel, and the truth lives between the headlines.